or give a good investment case for philanthropy. We've seen in the morning that only 2% goes to climate action. Today, it's very difficult to have a development project that doesn't have climate at its heart. I believe that the work that is being done on the social side with farmers, with gender and so forth, is also could be considered climate action. So we need to, I'm very excited about this initiative, looking forward to showing how governments can provide more insight into what they're doing. Their plans also with the MDBs, there's an ongoing discussion on reforms there, and there is a role for philanthropy to play to also provide more catalytic capital to actually move from the pledges to implementation. This is the how. So congratulations to the WEF for this initiative. I'm very happy to be part of it.
Thank you, Rania. Andrew, the Bezos Earth Fund was actually launched about 2 years ago, almost 3 now, and it was set up with a big bang, one of the largest philanthropic commitments to fight climate change as well as to protect nature. What can we learn from the fund and your experience so far? And can you give us examples of how the fund has actually helped catalyze climate and nature action?
Well, first, look, thank you, Gimwei. Thanks to the World Economic Forum. This is a very important initiative. I'm not sure what you've got to learn from us, but we've certainly got a lot to learn from each other. It's a very exciting time for philanthropy in nature and climate change, growing very rapidly in a really good way, and a real willingness to engage. Now, most philanthropy has not been very leveraged. You know, if we're lucky, we could think about philanthropy rising to about $30 billion for nature and climate, you know, in the not too distant future. Sounds like a lot of money, but it's a very small amount compared to what is needed, maybe 1 or 2%. So it has to be leveraged. And you can leverage in several ways. For example, last year we brought together some philanthropists and announced $5 billion for the so-called 30 by 30, 30% of the world's oceans and land to be protected by 2030. That was able to leverage actually quite a lot of political enthusiasm. We now got a universal agreement that this will be the target that everybody's. And what we will be doing is putting that money alongside government money, private money, and the idea is that the whole will add up to more than the sum of the parts. And that's exactly what Gaia is trying to do, is to bring the different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. Philanthropy has the possibility of putting money in quickly, boldly, getting ahead of the game, can help design policies, can help prepare pipelines of projects, and can help de-risk. And there's many kinds of ways you can leverage policy change, political engagement, de-risking, whole range of issues, and that's what we're going to be struggling with together, and that's what is so exciting.
Thank you, Andrew, and this is a very good segue to Tracy from McKinsey, who will be the knowledge partner for Gaia, right? Because the question of leverage, how do we find the right intervention points to create the scale and speed? Can you share with us more about how McKinsey is starting to think about this areas of work?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Gimwei, and also thank you for all the other panelists. The opportunity to work together is just magic. At McKinsey, we really aspire to accelerate sustainable and inclusive growth. And if you think about the requirements of addressing climate challenges and nature, we estimate that at the very least, we need an additional $3 trillion of spending annually. So really an enormous gap. And I think what this initiative provides, as you mentioned, Andrew, is a real opportunity to have a multiplier effect between private-public philanthropy. We are very excited about the power of the "and," right, of each of those axes working together. Our role as the knowledge partner is to help to identify real-world opportunities and trends where the power of the "and" is most helpful, right? Where private, public, and philanthropic interests can best work together. We're going to be providing an analytical framework, developing an analytical framework. We're going to be also working at how we can measure with impact and rigor the initiatives that take place so that we can create a flywheel and therefore attract more and more funding. And finally, we're going to help design the operating model so that we ensure that implementation actually really does happen in the way that it should. We're excited about identifying the benefits that each of the axes can have. So for governments, how do they get access to on-the-ground knowledge, to the dynamism that comes from some of the other areas? For philanthropy, how do we operate within the system and ensure that we get scale of the various initiatives? And for the private sector, how to identify new opportunities. So as I said, we're really excited to be the knowledge partner, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tracy. If I could now turn to Desmond, I spoke about the fact that we would like Gaia to actually support action in all parts of the world, different geographies, and Temasek Trust has just launched the Philanthropic Asia Alliance. And in fact, at the launch, you were able to announce commitments of more than $150 million from different foundations in Asia. Right? Can you tell us more about your plans forward? How do you intend to use these funds, right, to support PPP, the philanthropic public-private action, to scale efforts in addressing climate-nature issues?
Thank you very much. Also, I'd like to add my thanks to the WEF for initiating Gaia and for having Temasek Trust and the Philanthropy Asia Alliance as a key partner in support of the initiatives under Gaia. A little bit about Temasek Trust. Temasek Trust was established by Temasek Holdings with the view to being a steward of philanthropic assets and advocate of sustainability and to catalyze positive impact. And in this respect, what we have done is to initiate a Philanthropy Asia Alliance to bring together this whole notion of collaborative philanthropy, which is targeted at action, catalyzing collective action for a better world, and to prime Asia as a force for the greater good. The kinds of thematics that Philanthropy Asia Alliance is looking into developing and promoting will lie in the broad thematics of nature and climate, holistic and inclusive education, and also in the area of global and public health care. But we can all see that the actions that go about climate action have got cross effects into health and education, and it's a great place for us to start in terms of putting priority. And so what we look forward to is to bring together an alliance of partnerships at multiple levels. They could be donors who are interested in putting philanthropic money or investment capital into the programs. There could be an alliance and a forging of partnerships around program management on the ground in the different jurisdictions in Asia. And there could also be alliances forged with research and expertise, knowledge houses to bring together enabling capabilities so that we can spur action in a much more meaningful and targeted way. So these are all the kinds of things that we're hoping that we can bring together in Asia, and all of the efforts that we're putting together in Asia, obviously because we all recognize that Asia is crucial to how we can think about climate action for the greater good of the world.
Thank you, Desmond. And Roshni, if I could turn to you now. You are in business, but also very active in philanthropy, supporting freshwater systems, habitat protection. And given that you wear different hats, how do you see these different hats working in concert to support the scale and speed? What are kinds of models of philanthropy that you think could be quite effective in also mobilizing and catalyzing public sector action and business activities?
So I think, thank you so much. One of the roles that philanthropy plays, which is extremely important, is, we all represent very large private organizations which are multinational as well as multi-generational. And, for a group like ours, where the average age is 27 and young and below, their focus on climate, their focus on the need to change the way operating models work and business models work, but also sustainability agenda for private organizations as well as government is extremely, extremely important. I think where philanthropy plays a very big role and as a private organization is that often, I come from India, which is the fastest growing economy in the world, and the government has funds and the government has to choose between employment generation, manufacturing, economic growth, and then there's nature. And sometimes, the funding that nature gets, and we've discussed this even in philanthropy, tends to shrink in some areas over time. This is where philanthropists come in, because they can provide patient capital, they can have the ability to take risk, they can be there for a long term. And sometimes there are cases where the governments have often said, we have the funding, but we don't know how to go about doing. And I think that's where private philanthropists can draw from models which have existed in other parts of the world. When I was here in May, I spoke about our Aquapreneurs initiative in partnership with Uplink. And the whole idea was that over the next 5 years, we would throw an innovation challenge for freshwater and find solutions and entrepreneurs from the rest of the world, and not only help fund them so that they can apply their solutions to the geographies that they exist in, but how can we as philanthropists take those solutions, localize them, so they're global, but localize them, because freshwater and some of the climate issues are actually very local, but the solutions could be global. And how can we apply them in India or work with governments? So I think that philanthropy plays a very large role, which is inter-country, working with governments, finding models, finding solutions, and of course, funding not just in the countries that you belong to, but much of a global landscape.
Thank you. In fact, when you look at the different stacks of capital, philanthropic capital actually brings with it the ability to be very nimble, ability to think long-term, to be very patient, and also to potentially take higher risks so that we can pilot new ways of doing things. And if it's successful, well, let the markets and the government take over to scale that in a sustained and systemic way. I would now like to go to Better, right? Because you're in business, but you've also been thinking about strategic philanthropy for quite a while in the Gulf region as well as in other parts of the world. In Cambridge, you're the founding patron of the Center for Strategic Philanthropy. And I understand that you've also been appointed COP28, the key leader for corporate as well as philanthropic engagement. Can you share some of your thoughts with us and maybe give all of us here a bit of a preview of what we can expect at COP28 in terms of this engagement of the philanthropic community?
So first and foremost, again, also congratulations to OF, not just for launching Gaia, which of course is a very important and timely initiative, but generally elevating the role that philanthropy can play really across all of our challenges. So congratulations once again. I think we do have a historic opportunity to engage not just with philanthropists and philanthropies, but also family offices and other innovative capital actors, really to help to both move ahead at speed and at scale. So COP28 will strive to create a global architecture really for all these capital actors to act together and again to work alongside business and government to help to generate that leverage, which was of course already referred to. Now, as we all know, the emerging markets will bear the brunt of climate change, and it's also perhaps where the climate challenge will be either won or lost. But of course today, the emerging markets, or global south if you will, the majority of today, or certainly a lot less climate philanthropy, particularly in the mitigation space, goes towards these markets. I think Latin America and Africa combined less than 10% today of climate mitigation philanthropy. So there is, of course, a huge opportunity to scale that up. And what COP28 will be doing is really focusing on proper engagement of all the regions and anchored in frameworks of collaboration and cooperation. And one of the initiatives is, of course, to be working hopefully alongside Gaia to launch a sort of global philanthropy alliance on climate and nature to make sure we can bring all actors together. Just very quickly, since you asked me to provide a couple of teasers as to what to expect, hopefully in the run-up to and also at COP. a few things, and again, this is within the realm of philanthropy more specifically, but also really tapping into venture capital to help to spur much more venture philanthropy in this space, connecting venture capital not just with entrepreneurs, but also with scientists and people in the labs in many of these great research institutions around the world, including in the emerging markets, to help to scale up their technologies. And the other one is maximizing the potential of faith-based giving. I mean, just to give you one example from a part of the world closer to home, where you look at Islamic almsgiving, anywhere, so between zakat and sadaqah, which is compulsory almsgiving, and discretionary almsgiving, anywhere between $400 billion to $1 trillion a year is dispersed. And so this is, again, an opportunity which we'd like to harness, and there's a lot of work going into how best we can do that. So again, it's perfectly aligned with what the World Economic Forum is doing. I hate reinventing the wheel, so we will be working together to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Beda. Indeed, what Gaia hopes to do is to grow the pie, let's encourage more giving, but also have not to divert funding from the current areas of support, but to integrate climate and nature considerations as part of the philanthropic approach. And finally, most importantly, is how do we get a lot more effective to create that multiplier effect when you combine philanthropic capital with private and public action. I want to now open the floor for questions from the media. Yes, and please introduce yourself, and then we can have the panelists respond.
Thank you. My name is Irene Hell. I have a press agency. We report for Copenhagen Post and many, many, many others. So I'm thrilled to be here. First of all, congratulations on Gaia. Gaia means Earth. And the only way to save the planet is philanthropy. All the business are just taking and destroying, other than Bader Jaffer's business, of course. And then I want to salute Bader Jaffer for taking the lead on COP28. So what's said about you in my colleagues in the press rooms is that you are the one who was really doing and implementing, not just talking. So you will have a big impact, and you will, once you manage to get all this wonderful giving to the right people, you will have all together with all of you, exponential impact. And so I think there's hope for the planet.
Do you have a question for the panelists?
Yes. So I like the idea that the Islamic people are wonderful people. Say giving is give. But unfortunately, it's gone very often to the wrong people who shout the loudest. And the good, really working, hard-working NGOs who kill themselves to do something, they are not, they don't get the funds as much. So I'm glad you looking into it. And so what you're doing to get the money to the climate activists, what you're doing to, how will you redistribute the money?
Yeah. So first and foremost, thank you for your very kind comments. So my wife, who happens to be the COP28 champion, so my main job is to carry her bags, which I'm of course very proud to fulfill. But specifically with respect to Islamic philanthropy, I mean, this is something I've been trying to wrap my head around for a number of years now. A number of years ago, sat on the UN SG's high-level panel for humanitarian financing, and this is where this opportunity came up. I mean, we've been working through various mechanisms to help to address this challenge, one of which is we launched a non-profit digital platform called Hasana, which helps to channel Islamic almsgiving, both zakat and sadaqah, towards a host of efforts and indeed causes around the world. But there is an opportunity to also highlight the interconnectedness of climate across all the other, of course, global challenges. And this is what we'll be doing, hopefully, in the run-up to COP28. Not just with the Hasana platform, that's just a tool, but to figure out how we can do that. And again, not just with Islamic almsgiving. There's huge potential to figure out how to bring together all faiths to come together, again, in a concerted effort to address this issue. And the UAE has been doing a lot of work, as you know, with, I think in a few months' time, we'll be launching the Abrahamic Family House and bringing together Abrahamic faiths, but broader than that, all faiths together to figure out how we can be stronger together. And this is, I think, part of that effort.
Thank you. And Jessica?
Hi, thank you so much for your insights. I'm Jessica from Eco-Business in Singapore. I'd like to bring your attention to Asia, and you've mentioned that this is a region where climate change is felt very strongly, but it's also a region where it's lagging behind tremendously on philanthropy levels compared to EU and Asia, so EU and the US. How do you think you can close that gap? The other characteristic of Asia as well is that it's dominated by family conglomerates, and you'll find that their pot of philanthropic money is usually smaller than the family office money, and the family offices tend to view impact funds and venture philanthropy as very risky. And so I just wondered if you could offer some thoughts on how do you address that. Thank you.
Desmond?
Happy to answer.
Thank you, Jessica, for the question. I think you are right to say that there is a lot of catching up to do in Asia, but there is also a lot of optimism that in Asia there is a lot of interest now in moving towards sustainability, impact, and philanthropy. And I would say that there is a huge generational transfer of wealth that we're seeing taking place over the next few years in the order of trillions of dollars. And the next generation of wealthy have regarded that their role, and we're seeing a lot of that in terms of the trend, a lot of that is in that space of leaving a legacy for the future and making sure that what they do has impact, and they're taking a lot more consideration into responsibility and sustainability. So that's one aspect. I think there is also a lot of interest now in moving away from just checkbook charity to the kind of philanthropy that is scalable and that is systemic and structural in its approach towards solving some of the much more pressing issues of environment and society. So this is yet another trend that we're seeing. There is also interest, I would say, in innovative finance. And I think that kind of innovative finance around blended structures and around outcomes-based financing through a pay-for-success model. These are new ideas in many jurisdictions, although it's been tried in others. But there is a lot of interest in bringing together some of these innovations to try and bring together where catalytic philanthropic capital can play a role in making things a lot more bankable for the rest of the investment community. So these are, in my mind, some of the areas where I think we're seeing important philanthropic shifts in Asia, and it augurs well for all of us because also there is a keen sense that there is a need for the public sector, the private sector, and the philanthropic sector, as what we're looking to do through WEF, to come together in a much more powerful way to drive catalytic action for climate.
Thank you, Desmond. And yes.
Hi, I'm Laurent Thomé with Agence France Presse. You cited this figure that only 2% of philanthropic giving goes to climate. Do you have a target as to where you want this to go? I don't know, 5%, 10%, and in how many years? And also, why do you think that it's philanthropic giving is so low for climate issues?
Andrew, do you want to reflect?
Well, it was much lower. As we talk about Asia needing to rise, so to speak, we've got to remember that 10 years ago, in Western philanthropies were putting almost nothing into climate change. And then a couple of things happened. One, the scale of the problem became evident and the implications of the problem. So for heaven's sake, let's get in there. And remember, leading philanthropists, high net worth families, they're in the business of solving big problems. They like big challenges. And then it was recognized that actually there are system issues. And so that's where the whole idea of, if you like, leverage came from. So you've seen two things happen in the Western philanthropies. One, an amazing growth, still, as you say, relatively small. But remember, 2% of $1 trillion is not that small. It will rise. We don't have any targets as to what it should become. But an important point is that actually some of the other 98% is also very relevant to climate change. So, for example, quite a bit of philanthropy goes into education. If you've got $1 million to spend on adaptation in climate, don't buy cement. Educate a child, because you will create a resilient person who will then be part of the solution leading us into the 2030s and 2040s. So we have to think about the other 98% as well. So I think Kim Hui's point is a really good one, whereby where she says our job is not to sort of say, hey, stop financing this and finance that instead. It's actually, if you like, to adjust the entire 100%. Say, for heaven's sake, there are major problems out there. The way you finance agriculture has to take climate into account. The way you finance education has to take climate into account. And all of those pieces. And one of the great challenges, I love what Bada is doing with regard to faith-based philanthropy. If you look at faith-based philanthropy in the West, you actually see some of it very targeted towards climate and nature. You see others that is heading in totally the opposite direction. And so what one needs to do is have that process of dialogue so that we actually all get on the same page.
I just wanted to add something to that. There's a role for governments in this to be quite clear in terms of what are these projects that include climate and other action. And again, we tried during COP27 to make the point over and again that climate and development come hand in hand. They're not mutually exclusive. Climate action, SDG 13 is part of the 17 SDGs. And as Andrew pointed out, if I'm helping farmers with resilient crops, that's adaptation, that's climate action. Maybe philanthropists in the lead up to, or in the past, it was not identified very clearly because mitigation has metrics, adaptation doesn't. So I think in this initiative, we want to showcase more, be very clear with certain, special examples that could be scaled. And that's why if we take a country case such as NOEFI, which is the Nexus of Water, Food and Energy in Egypt, it's a platform where we're bringing multilateral development banks, philanthropy, private sector, GFANs on specific projects to show that if the government is clear, if there's interest, if we're able to have commitment, clarity, and with credibility, we can move forward. So, it's not the target, it's the narrative that we need to keep on pushing. And I think this initiative will hopefully be able to achieve that together.
Thank you.
If I may, just to respond very quickly.
Please, Bada.
So look, it is trending, as has been mentioned, in the right direction. I think in the last 5 years alone, it's gone up 3 times. But of course, starting from a relatively low baseline, but it is trending in the right direction. To answer your question, why is it that not more is going towards climate philanthropy? There was an interesting study that was completed at the end of last year. I'll have to dig it up and send it to you, but it basically surveyed, 1,000 or so foundations and asked them, first question, do you believe that climate is extremely important and urgent? And 90% agreed. And then 70% said that they believe that it's going to impact their work, right? It'll have a negative impact on their work and their ability to achieve their mandates. But only 10% believed that it was actually relevant to their mandate. So it was a little bit about not my problem, someone else's other problem. But the interconnected piece is, I think, where we're going to see major shifts. And I think we are at that sort of turning point now. So I'm very optimistic that the number will rise. But as has been mentioned, that we're going to see much more sort of action across the philanthropic community and foundation community, including with foundations whose primary mandate and role is not necessarily specifically climate and nature.
Indeed, the problems are interconnected, but so are the solutions. So when we think about addressing the solution space, let's also take a very holistic, systemic approach. And
Thank you. My name is Andrew Lawton. I'm with True North in Canada, and my question's for Ms. Francis. I know the theme has been philanthropy, so I was just hoping you could clarify McKinsey's role as knowledge partner. The mandate that you mentioned of identifying solutions, refining funding projects, is McKinsey donating these services, or will it be paid, and if so, by whom?
That is our role. You have correctly identified our role. I can provide detail of the funding afterwards, but we are very proud of this. And our overall social responsibility spending is, we have a commitment of $2 billion, of which we spend about $200 million each year in services and also in cash in contributing to projects such as projects like this.
any other questions? Yes.
Solutions, sorry. Actually, I was just wondering if any of you could provide a little bit more detail in terms of the breakdown of the of the philanthropical contributions towards climate action. In terms of countries, regions, you spoke of education. I'm wondering, how, for instance, in education, whether that's concentrated in the West or, where there's action really on the ground, where in terms of adaptation and so forth. And I would also be interested in knowing about your financing, the financing of your work.
A lot of the data that's been quoted in this discussion is based off work from McKinsey, the analysis from McKinsey as well as from ClimateWorks, right? So we'll be happy to share with you the findings from this report post this press conference. But I wonder whether any one of you, maybe Roshni, you want to reflect on the comments or the questions.
So I think that on the point that you raised on education, now climate is almost part of every discourse. So I think that and I can only reflect that much more about India because I'm from India, that we know today it's much more of an issue that you can see and feel. I'm from Delhi. Every day Delhi is at 500, atmosphere levels, so we know that it's tough to breathe. So now the problem has become so much more apparent that a lot of the discourse is whether it's students in its school, whether it's government, whether it's livelihoods. So there's the discussion on how to improve climate, which is across various demographics as well as various sectors. So I think adapted solutions in education would be different from what it would be in livelihood, might be very different than what it might be in direct intervention on climate, on air, for example. So I think that the applications will be different. We will probably have to seek solutions and innovations in each one of those verticals and a few horizontals. And that's the way we're going to have to adapt solutions as we go forward. And today, if it's a problem in India, it's a matter of time when it's a problem somewhere else. Because the thing about environment and nature is it's porous.
Thank you. And we've reached the end of the press conference, and thank you for your time and attention. Thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.